Hi, everybody, and welcome to Mindful Marathon Conversations. I am Dr. Michelle Quirk. I'm a pediatrician and a run coach and founder of Mindful Marathon. And it's truly an honor today to speak with my guest. For a lot of us, running a marathon seems daunting. And our guest has run hundreds of marathons, really, thousands and thousands of miles, and across the Sahara Desert, up mountains. The list is extensive and you get the idea. He spent over a decade of his life addicted to drugs and alcohol and now has over 29 years of sobriety. He is a runner, ultramarathoner, author, motivational speaker, and all-around inspiring human. So Charlie Engle, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Hey, it's great. Thank you so much. You did that extremely well too, by the way. Congrats.
Thanks.
You're
Um,
a natural at this,
I
so
don't know
I'm
about
happy to
that.
be here.
Well, I certainly
You
appreciate
are.
it. So there are, we were talking about this before, there's a lot of people out there struggling and suffering right now. And so we're going to chat today about how physical exercise can help us work through our struggles and brainstorm the idea of movement as medicine and where movement fits in with treatment for addiction. So let me start out by asking, were you always a runner? Set that stage for us.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm old enough that I consider myself to be a child of the 60s. I was born in 62, so my mother was very, let's just say my upbringing was quite bohemian. So when you asked me if I was a runner, I actually write about this in the first chapter of my book, but I have this vision of this long-haired little boy running around in my underwear in the front yard, in North Carolina in like rainstorms. And like I loved storms when I was a kid. So, and my mom was never a mom that said no to anything really. So, I would just I'd strip down and run out the front door. And what I found in that was, I think, a lot of freedom. Even as a kid, I just really loved the way that made me feel.
Yeah.
So, flashing forward, I did end up running in high school, and I was a pretty good runner. And I went to college. Should have run in college, but running wasn't cool, and so I decided I wanted to play either football or basketball I was at the University of North Carolina, so there wasn't much chance of those things happening. And then I fell into 10 years, as you said, of addiction. And I will say though, running was always the thing. Like when I would get sick of my own behavior and tired of feeling like crap, running was the thing that I turned to even during those years to try to get myself healthy again. And even though it might only last a week or a month, and I would feel better, and then I would dive back down into the rabbit hole, and it was this never-ending cycle. Running was still part of my life. And then, and then at 29, when I finally got my act together, running became a huge part of my life, and by far the most important part of my recovery from addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you take us back to that? I guess, I mean, I don't know. Would you consider that the rock bottom, like when you
I
were
would. You
29
never know,
and
Michelle. There might be another one waiting for me in the future. So,
no?
up to this point, that is, and I try to remain humble about, sticking to the old one day at a time mantra. You never know what the future holds. But, at that point in my life, I had, you know, here's the thing. During those 10 years, I was always like the top salesperson at my company. I bought a house, I bought a car. Certainly wasn't wealthy, but I was living what from the outside, would appear to be a fairly normal life. I got married, and I married someone whose father struggled with alcoholism. So I married somebody who was very comfortable with my form of kind of craziness. And so it wasn't as obvious to the outside world, but I really struggled. And I was a binger. I would just disappear for a few days or a week or a couple of weeks. And come back with my tail between my legs and apologize. And it was a lot of years before I understood the nature of addiction. I knew it from the standpoint of being a person in active addiction, but
Yeah.
post that, it took a while for me to understand that, uh, like I thought I was just insincere or a liar or whatever. And an addict actually, most of the time, they mean it. Like when they say, I'm never going to do that again. I apologize. Like all the normally that's how they feel. That's certainly how I felt.
Mhm.
So for me, I went to treatment, I went to meetings, I went to church, I went to a shaman. I always joked that if I could have found a witch doctor, I would have gone to see that person. Like I tried everything as far as I was concerned to quit. And at 29, my first son was born. And like I thought he was just going to magically change that for me, and that his mere presence on the planet would stop me from using, because I felt love for this child and from him that I hadn't really experienced before. And as an addict, I felt pretty undeserving of those things. So I thought this was finally it. A couple months later, after he was born, I found myself in the same situation, with 6-day binge and the police searching my car, and just this terrible situation. And it wasn't until then that I understood that, as I like to say, nobody was coming to save me. Like there
Mhm.
wasn't, my son couldn't save me, and my boss and my wife and my circumstances, and nothing outside of me was ever going to take that first step for me.
Yeah.
And that is what I needed to have happen. And it changed everything for me. And I went to an AA meeting that night because I really wanted to, for the first time ever. Like I wanted to go and see, what was there for me. And I got up the next day and I went for a run, and I did those two things every day for 3 straight years, without missing a day. I ran and I went to a meeting, and I slowly figured out how to sort of make a life for myself.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, yeah, I've never gone on a run streak myself, but I imagine it would be
Yeah.
transformative in a lot of ways.
It was also a relief when I let it go. I know people who've been on really long streaks. And look, I think there's power in committing to, and I'm being almost a run snob when I say this, but I don't consider 1 mile to be a run. A person, unless like 3 miles is your max run or whatever it might be. But like if you're kind of a normal runner and you run 5 or 6 miles a day or whatever, I've always said that I think like 3 miles is like that would be the magic number if I was ever going to go on a run streak again. But interestingly, I figured out that for me, I actually need, and some of it's age now, but I need to do yoga. I need to meditate. I need to do some other things some days to let my body heal up some.
Yeah, same here. And I do not keep the miles you do, but
Yeah.
I was particularly moved by something you said, or maybe I read it, but a lot of people asked you at first, are you essentially like trading out one
Mm.
addiction for another? And you said that there's no hiding in running. And I really love that.
Yeah. Well, most people, it's interesting because if you're talking to an audience, you probably had the same experience. If you were to ask the audience of 25 people, how many of you hate running? Probably two-thirds of the audience would raise their hands. And
Yeah.
I like to then pick on them and say, so, oh, let me understand. So you hate like being outside in the sunshine, you hate the birds singing, and you hate feeling like those good endorphin really like you hate. And they're like, no, we don't hate that. I'm like, okay, so you don't hate running. Like you hate how running sometimes makes you feel because it's uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Then of course I dive into the relationship between discomfort or being uncomfortable and the most valuable things that we have in our lives. And pretty much everyone on the planet, for the most part, thinks that they've been through hardship. they've struggled, and it's part of the human condition. So I think it is true. Most people struggle and acknowledge struggle. And
Yeah.
if they're honest, they will also say that those struggles made them stronger and actually have helped to form the person that they are. So I always frame running around that and around the fact that I choose to do something that is arguably uncomfortable, but some of it is because I do know the benefit. It would be like you saying, well, I really don't like to work, but I do like money. So I'm going to work because I got to pay. I mean, a lot of people do feel that way. I mean, look, none of us likes everything we do all the time, but trying to find a bond, a love relationship between doing the things that I spend my time doing, whether it's running, speaking, writing, working,
Mhm.
and actually enjoy doing it, I think is a big deal. To your point about, you know, switching addictions, I got the question a lot. And one of the things that I actually acknowledged early on, I'm like, yeah, I'm running like an addict. Like I can't stop. Every single day I ran hard. I mean, I went out the door and I ran as hard as I possibly could. And some of that was because I wanted to sort of like pound the addict out of me. And I thought if I just ran hard enough that I could make that part of my personality go away, because my experience had been like, that guy's trying to kill me. And it took those few years of doing this and a reevaluation of the nature of addiction. you know, a true drug addiction is about hiding. It's about not feeling anything. And if I did have a feeling, I would just drink or drug it away. And the reasons behind all that are a combination of environment and genetics and just whatever trauma and all of those things that we all have. But the point is, it took those 3 years of really hard running for me to understand that the addictive part of my nature is all the best parts of me. Like without the addict and that addictive, obsessive sometimes nature, I probably wouldn't be good at anything. And so rather than viewing the sort of the pathology of addiction as a negative thing, I really, and I know it sounds like hyperbole and I'm making the best out of something, but like without my addictions, I probably wouldn't be good at anything. And so it really is like, I'm not just happy to be a recovering addict. I'm grateful for it. And, I feel like it's made me who I am. And if you look around you, I always tell anybody, look around you, look at the people who are most successful in your life. They're not always happy, but the thing that they're good at, whatever that thing might be, and it may not be around making money or running or anything else, but whatever they're good at, there's always a period of obsession that has to be there for you to develop the skills, the love, the aptitude for that thing. And I think people forget that. I'm not a balanced person, and pretty much every way I'm not balanced. And yes, every once in a while, my on external pressure, whether it's my wife or some other obvious sign, will say, you know what, you're a little out of whack right now. You're too far out this direction. You need to come back. But as long as I don't put, illicit drugs and alcohol in my system, I mostly function pretty well. So,
Yeah.
um, I encourage people to look at addiction as an opportunity rather than a curse.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you've turned that into a strength, or it is a strength. I mean, that's who you are. It's all
Yeah.
part of who you are.
I didn't
Yeah.
get rid of it. It's still
No.
here,
Yeah.
thankfully.
Yeah. I don't know. I was thinking about myself and all of my physician colleagues who are, struggling right now with the pandemic. And a lot of us, we are very, type A perfectionist type people. And in order to get through all of that training, that served us really well. But now, that self-care piece sometimes is difficult. I feel like when you're just kind of on a different sort of treadmill going forward, it's really hard once you get through all of that to take a breath and stop.
That's so true. And I mean, I think it's really, Yeah, it is important to acknowledge the struggle and to pay more attention to self-care. And as you and I have discussed, movement is one way, to do that. And I think, what you reminded me of something when you said that. It's something I've said to my kids always, and I've said to a lot of audiences is, we almost always, as humans, we project our worst moments into the future. Like, I don't care if it's in your marriage or it's at your job or it's on a run. Like, a good example would be to be in a marathon, and like you're running that marathon and you're at mile 16 and things are going great, and all of a sudden you got a pain or your chest, whatever, you feel you're bonking and you're in trouble. Like, what we do, the panic sets in immediately, and we
Mhm.
we project that this is how we're going to feel for the next 10 miles, for the rest of this race. Like, it's not going to get better.
Mhm.
And again, we do that with relationships. You have an argument with your spouse, and it feels in that moment like, okay, it's always going to feel like this. And it's important to let those moments pass by and to fuel yourself, whether that's emotionally in the case of a relationship or in the case of a marathon. For me, it means eating 500 calories, drinking 2 cups of water and some Gatorade or something, but continue to move. Like, if I'm in a race and that happens, I will continue to move forward, walking, slow it down a little, eat those calories, cut myself a break for a minute, and trust the fact, because experience tells me if I just keep moving and I give my body all these things that it clearly needs, I my pain level may only go from a 10 to an 8, but that's a really significant difference when you're struggling. And I
Yeah.
think that that's the case in all parts of our lives, and as it relates to addiction, I tell people that I work with all the time is like, somebody will call me, they're like, I want to have a drink. My life sucks and I want to drink. I use it. I don't ever say, please don't do that. Like, people look at me like I'm crazy sometimes. Instead, I'm like, yeah, if I had your life, I'd want to drink too. It's like, and usually I do that to get them to laugh, because we tend to take those moments in our lives and ourselves so seriously all the time. And then I just say, look, I'll make a deal with you. Don't drink today. If you still want to drink tomorrow, you give me a call again. I'll go buy the 6 pack and I'll come over and we'll drink it together. And it's because I know they're going to get through the day. They're going to go to sleep that night. They're going to wake up the next morning, and the view is going to be just a little bit different.
Yeah.
And not one time ever. The only time that's ever not worked was a guy who had already relapsed and he just hadn't told me. So
Okay.
I did not go share a 6 pack with him, and I certainly would never do that. But the point was, I think also, and I'm sure you experienced it in your profession, people don't like to be told no. They want suggestions. They actually want to be. It's no different than dealing with a teenager. If you simply say no out of hand, don't do that. It rarely works, or it might work at the moment, but it really doesn't work. People
Mhm.
have to come to their own conclusions about how to make the best decisions for themselves.
Yeah.
And that's why with running and with movement, as you and I both believe, movement as medicine. We need that medicine. I know I'm over talking here, but the other thing that I always like to say is, when people start like a running program, they do the same thing.
Uh-huh.
They spent 10 years not exercising, and they're surprised when the first day that they run, it feels awful.
Yep.
They're like, whoa, yeah, that's a shock, you know, go figure. And but instead of, again, taking that feeling and projecting it forward, like this is the way it's always going to be, focus on today. When tomorrow gets here, focus on tomorrow. And like, it sounds cliche and simple, but it really is. It's true in all things, that the one day at a time approach, mentally, I think it's what we're best equipped for.
Yeah. I mean, in the office over the last year and a half, we've seen quite a lot of, kids and families being very sedentary. I mean, we were to begin with, but I feel like the last year and a half made it worse. And I find now I don't even really look at the numbers. Like I can see the growth chart and I just say, what do you think about trying to find like 5 minutes if you're really on the couch? And people think I'm crazy, but it's really true. I mean, small steps consistently and you just get into a routine and you build it out. You don't just go out and run for an hour tomorrow when you've been on the couch for months and months. But I started writing walking prescriptions for
Huh.
kids.
That's brilliant. I love that. I love that. And it really, yeah. I mean, it's it truly is the case. I mean, even for me, some days that the hardest thing to do is get out the door.
Mhm.
And I also think too that for runners, I don't know how you do it, but like for me, I am a time runner.
Mhm.
Excuse me, I'm a time runner. I'm not a mileage runner. So, I focus on even a day like today. Like I didn't get out the door until 11 o'clock this morning. I knew we were going to speak at 1. So I'm like, okay, I've got a couple of hours. And I ended up walking for the first 45 minutes, because that's just what I felt like my body wanted today. And then I ran the rest of the time, and it felt good. But to not put that pressure of I'm going to go run 8 miles.
Mhm.
Now, if you're training for a specific event and you're trying to run a certain time, which is not the vast majority of people,
Yeah.
the vast majority of people, if they enter a half marathon, they really just want to finish. Most people, that's the way it is. There's a percentage once you gain a little experience, you might want to beat your best time or something like that. And then you might have to do a little more specific training. But by the time you've gotten to that point, you've sort of come to an understanding with your body and with running that, okay, this is what we're doing. I
Yep.
mean, the other point, I can't remember if I've said this to you in conversation before, but I mean, I enter a lot of 100-mile races. So I found that ultra running was really the sweet spot for me. And part of it is because it is sort of I'm not complimenting myself as a smart person, but it's a thinking person's sport
Mhm.
in that you have to maintain, like you can't carb load and hydrate enough to run 100 miles. Like you have to continuously monitor your body, keep putting in fuel, understand your pace. Like you really have to pay attention. And people ask all the time, why do I keep doing it? Why would you keep entering these races? And I'm like, I only enter for one reason. And it's not because I'm not very smart. It's because I actually want to get to that point in the race where I cannot continue. And it happens every single time. I've never run a 100-miler where I didn't question my sanity and wonder what in the hell I was thinking and why I thought this was a good idea again. But that is the point. I want to get to that point, whether it happens at 30 miles or 80 miles, where I want to quit. And then I want to find a way to get beyond that because it's the most salient lesson for life. The more often you hit a hardship that you can find a way to get beyond, the more familiar that feels when those hardships happen in sort of real world circumstances,
Yeah.
where you want to tell your boss to shove it, or, your partner in life to, hit the bricks or whatever. Those things might still happen. They happen to everybody. But it's usually an emotional decision we make in a moment, and those are the ones that we tend to regret. So I tell people all the time in a race, just don't quit when you feel like that. Just keep moving, do these things that you understand how to do,
Mhm.
and you'll be surprised that you might make it to the finish. And then you've given yourself that boost of confidence that you can't get anywhere else. There is nothing. The other thing is too, I ask people all the time in a marathon, like even their first marathon, I'm like, what do you remember the most? To a person, they're like, oh man, at 19 miles, I really wanted to quit. Nobody says, oh, the first 10 miles were so easy. That's what I remember. Nobody remembers that. It's like the rest of our life, right? You don't
Yeah.
remember the easy days. You remember the struggles because that's
Mhm.
the way we're built. And those struggles are what helps us. So trying to avoid them is pretty pointless, and I would even say harmful. There's comfort is overrated. There's nothing to be gained from anything that comes easy.
Yeah, it's very true. What's the saying? Like everything you want is outside your comfort zone,
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah,
yeah.
true.
And most people just aren't willing to, to risk that discomfort. And again, the funny thing is they would do it in, like, I speak to a lot of entrepreneurial groups and very successful business groups. And a lot of times those are not, I'll be in a room full of people who don't consider themselves to be athletes or runners. And I'm like, okay, who in here started a business? Everybody raises their hands. I'm like, was it always easy? Like, what are the parts of it you remember? I mean, everybody remembers the day that they almost had to, like, close the doors,
Mhm.
or, they couldn't pay their employees, I mean, those are the emotionally impactful days. And they're the ones that actually help us be successful. And so the same is true. The thing is, you and I know the secret that running, we're in control. I mean, I always remind people, you can quit anytime you want. You're running a half marathon. You really want to quit. I mean, it's not what I think you should do, but you know, it's so unlike the rest of our lives. We don't choose to ever have a car accident, or we don't choose to have cancer, or we don't choose to have something that comes at us out of the blue. But the more often we choose discomfort in the places where we can make decisions,
Yeah.
the more familiar we'll be with that struggle, and the better equipped we'll be to handle the things that come out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, that segues into how this all plays into treatment and healing, I guess, really, when it comes to addiction. I mean, I wonder how we talked about this, but when you were going through treatment, I mean, is there any kind of formal, I don't know, physical activity or physical fitness recommendations while you were going through that? Where are we with that? I mean, it doesn't sound like we're doing a great job.
No, we're in a really terrible place in this country, and there are some parts of the world that are doing better. Not surprisingly, some of the Scandinavian countries, who always seem to be at the cutting edge of sort of doing more humane approaches to certain things, whether it's incarceration or healthcare. But in the U.S., about 5 million people enter a drug rehab every single year, and the quote unquote success rate is less than 10%. And that means that a person has stayed clean and sober for up to a year. That's the benchmark that someone
That's
made
it.
up, and it's the one that most people use. So I don't know any other industry. I mean, you as a doctor, if you lost 90% of your patients, I would assume that you would not consider that to be successful.
No.
Or, I mean, maybe they didn't die, but even if 90% of them just simply didn't get better, I
Yeah.
don't think we would look at that as a positive. Yet in the addiction space, and some of it is driven by the same things, some of it's driven by laziness. A lot of it's driven by money, of course, because there's a lot of lobbyists and dollars and everything that's spent to keep a really big industry kind of stuck where it is right now.
Mhm.
And in general, the industry sticks to tried and true procedures which revolve around talk therapy. And talk therapy is very powerful. I am in no way, shape, or form saying that it doesn't have its place in recovery, especially not only from drugs and alcohol, but very often from the trauma that may have created the fertile ground that this addictive behavior grew out of.
Yeah.
But my mantra has really been for many years now, if you don't feel good physically, then you can't get well. And very often people go into treatment after they've uh, mistreated their body with drugs and alcohol and other types of abuse for many years. And they
Mhm.
go into treatment, and the focus, it starts with the mind and the emotion, and they're so beaten down physically. So it's my contention, and I've been doing it with a couple of treatment centers so far very successfully, that early addiction recovery should really focus on certainly equally on physical fitness, not boot camp, and it
Yeah.
should be designed for each individual person. But in general, you can't find a treatment center that makes physical movement compulsory. It's available. There might be yoga classes a couple days a week. They might
Mhm.
have a little gym tucked away in a corner, but I'm sorry, in general, people who aren't sort of required to use it or
Mm.
given the tools to know how, they're not going to do it. They're
Yeah.
just not going to. And so they will leave that treatment center 30 or 60 days later, hopefully healthier and trying to be equipped to go back out in the world, but without any real tools of how to take care of themselves physically.
Mhm.
So what I'm proposing very much in the industry, and I'm working with some of the top folks, including Deepak Chopra and the Chopra Foundation these days, to really devising the fitness plan is not rocket science, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of other, there's a whole lot more qualified people when it comes to exercise physiology and things like that. So my viewpoint is that it just, something has to be done. Like, we have to encourage people to move
Yeah.
more. We have to give them the tools to track that. You have to feel physical. We know how it feels. I needed to go for a run before you and I talked, because I need that release. I need my mind to calm down, my body to sort of be a little more mellow, so that I can think clearly and talk too much.
No, I mean, a lot of people think that, I'm all about motivating, people because of the physical fitness part of it. And all of that is great, right? And preventing chronic disease and all of these things. But really, I stuck with it. I was one of those people who hated running, but I picked it up at a difficult time in my life when my dad was sick and had cancer. And I think the reason I kept going out every day is because of the mental aspect of it. And it just cleared my head of all of that other stuff that was going on. So even if it was hard or that was uncomfortable, it was not as uncomfortable maybe as all of the other stuff going on at the time.
Totally.
And yeah, I think
It's a
that's why I
re-
stuck with it.
it's a relief. It's such a, and again, people think about running. Okay, don't run, walk.
Walk.
Don't, there's so many things you can do. I mean, fast walking or even just moderate walking has been proven over and over again to be, in some ways, even healthier than running. But certainly, in a general sense, it's as good for you as running.
Yeah.
And no one no one doesn't think better after a run, or after a walk. Like, it just is, it just makes sense, because you're burning off some of the excess energy. People also relate, well, I'm too tired to do this. You and I both know that you're too tired because you're not doing it.
Mhm.
If you're not running, if you're not moving, that creates a lethargy that is really hard to overcome. And just getting up and getting out the door and doing something, hydrate, sleep. People also ask, I mean, the things, I am not an exercise nut as much as I am a lifestyle nut. I mean, I do believe that it is my responsibility. I'm not a religious person, but I use this tool on all my more religious friends all the time. I'm like, okay, so the only thing that you actually own on this planet is that body, right?
Mhm.
I mean, because there isn't, no matter how many cars or houses, you can say that you own them. You don't own them. You don't control that. Like,
Yeah.
you own this bag of skin and water and bones. Like, that's all that you own. So whatever your belief system is, it is my view that it's our individual responsibility to take care of this. Like, this is the only thing that we have, and if we don't, it's incredibly disrespectful to whatever it is out there in the universe that you believe in, because it's the thing we've got, and
Yeah.
we're given the ability to move and to generate this endorphin release and these feelings of contentedness and hope and happiness that come from exercise. And again, people relate it somehow to being overly difficult. And I mean, I just always say that it's all difficult. And if you choose to make it even harder by not keeping your body in shape, then I interrupted myself a minute ago. So in the hierarchy of things that I actually believe in, sleep and hydration are number one and number two. Exercise is actually number three, but they all go hand in hand because it
Yeah.
took me years of overtraining and running too hard and doing all these other things and not hydrating and not eating and sleeping well enough. It took me a lot of years of doing that and really kind of beating up my body to understand that I could actually train less and not have to work quite so hard if I just made sure I was hydrated and I got 8 hours of sleep and I let my body recover from the exercise.
Yep.
And if you don't do that, then you won't get the benefits.
Yeah, I think I learned that the hard way in marathon training at least once, but
Yeah,
the rest and the recovery is as important as the training
yeah,
and crossing off the runs on the training plan.
yeah.
For
Training
sure.
schedules. I am a big believer. It's the next book I should write called instinctive training, because I actually think that the best training methods are the ones where we learn how to analyze and do like a full body check in the morning on any given day, and based on that we make the decision of what our training is going to look like that day.
Yeah.
Now, some of that takes experience, and I do understand that for new runners especially, it's nice to have a schedule laid out that says run this many miles on Tuesday and whatever. But I do think it's important to trust ourselves. And sometimes we have to analyze our own motives, and if the reason we don't want to do our long run today is because we just feel lazy, then that's not a great reason.
Yeah.
um you know it should be it should be something a little more substantive, maybe a really hard week at work, or kids are sick at home, or particular stress. And then, though, I always say to people, you're supposed to go out for a 2-hour run. Well, you got 2 hours blocked off on the schedule. Why don't you just go for a walk, listen to a
Mhm. Yep.
do something that makes you feel good, and is easier.
Yeah. It's definitely hard for the newer runners to trust themselves and how they feel. Like we spend a lot of time talking about the effort scale, and people almost think like they're not doing enough if it's an easier effort. But
Yeah.
that's like really just tapping into what that feels like.
Yeah, well, also it's like relationships, right? I mean, interestingly, new runners, once they get the bug, and by that I mean they finally get over that initial hump of, it being very uncomfortable, then it's like, holy crap, I feel great. Like my
Yeah.
energy's better, like everything's better. So it's a little like being in love. There's that you want to do that all the time. Like you
Yeah.
want to be with that person. Like there's that, you just are so full of running at that time that that's what you want to do. So it's hard to temper that with a plan that allows you to stay healthy and injury free, which is maybe the hardest part. But
Yeah.
I never want to take that away. I tell people, look, just realize if you've spent 10 years not running, that you can't start by going out and running 7 days a week, because you can
Yeah.
do that for a week or two, but your body will break down, and you'll, no matter who you are, and you'll end up with an injury. Then you'll have to have time off, and then so it is important to get what you feel like is a good moderate plan to begin with. And I always tell people too, your first marathon or whatever, don't think about time, don't worry about any of that stuff. Just try to be present.
Yeah.
Try to not make the goal getting to the finish line, because that's the least important part of the entire thing.
So
But that's
true.
a tough one. We all like to feel that medal around our neck.
I know, but it's the journey, right? It's the whole
Yeah,
training really, but the
it is.
whole
Those days, I mean, the days that I remember in a training journey are always I am, one thing I'm good at is, if I say I'm going to run on Tuesday, for 2 hours, if it's 100 degrees or if it's raining and 30 degrees, I'm going to go run. And weirdly, it's a lot easier to have that approach to it, because then I don't have to even think about it. Like I'm not going to run only if the weather's nice
Yeah.
or whatever. I'm going to go run because it does make me stronger to know that weather's just weather. And like, even if it's cold and rainy, after I'm out there for 5 minutes, if I've dressed properly, I'm comfortable. Or if
Yeah.
it's super hot, make sure you bring water, be smart about how you're going about it. But when you get through that run, you'll feel incredibly satisfied.
Hmm. And you might find that you like certain things. Like I
Yeah.
like running in the rain.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. That's
Yeah.
good. We got that in common.
Yes.
Like I said in the beginning, I'm a storm runner. I love storms. I always have. And I think another part of it is very often I'll go out to my trails, and if it is raining, I'm alone.
Yeah.
There's nobody else out there. And I
Yeah.
sort of like that, that peace that comes with just kind of being out there by yourself.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Well, well, listen, your mission is so important, and I thank you for for being here and for sharing so much of your story and your time with us. So tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Everything you'd ever want to know and far more than you want to know is on my website. It's just my name, charlieengle.com. All my social media connections are there if you follow that kind of stuff. There's a blog, there's talks that I've given. You can buy my book. If you want to buy it from me, you can do that, and I'm happy to sign one and send it out. And it's called Running Man, but I always tell people that it's actually it has very little to do with running. I
It's
really like
about life.
there's better runners out there who can write about running. Mine is about sort of the experience of struggle and just like most of our lives, mine's been filled with a lot of highs and lows. And I think that it's easy to be optimistic when everything is going your way, but it's important to share the struggles with other people when it's not. And that is part of life that we all relate to as humans.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I have a copy, so when I finally get to meet you in person, I'll have you sign
Wonderful.
it. Well, thank you so much. This was wonderful. It was a huge treat for me too.
My pleasure. Well, I look forward to getting in some miles with you sometime soon. Hopefully next year for sure.
I would love that.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. If you liked it, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And if you are a newer runner or a runner who hasn't run in a while and you're looking to get back into the sport, you can find out how to work with me over on my website, which is mindful-marathon.com. See you on the next episode.